Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name is Martin Jago, and in this video we are attacking a pet peeve in poetry. The 3 P's, a pet peeve in poetry. What is that pet peeve? It happens to be the conflation of the lived experience of the person who wrote the poem with the speaker, and that's why I've titled this particular video, Trust the Poem, Not the Poet. And that's riffing on a famous quote by D.H. Lawrence, which is, trust the tale, not the teller. Let me explain in a little more detail. Poetry is not and does not need be autobiographical. Sometimes it is, but it really doesn't matter who the poet is, unless, of course, it does matter. And sometimes, in some circumstances, it does. And we'll also get to that in this video. But we often see the conflation of confessionalist poetry, for example, as a confession. Art is a construct. It is not real life, and truth is something different to fact. Let me say that again. For a work of art to be truthful doesn't need to be real. I think the fact that our culture is steeped in realism is one of the stumbling blocks in trying to sort of logically unpack this idea. If you look at Guernica by Pablo Picasso, there's nothing real about it in a kind of everyday way, but there's an absolute truth to the painting and its stark representation of the horrors of war. So the pervasive myth is that the speaker is the poet, and the poem is the lived experience or testimony of that poet. Why does this myth persist? Well, I think the first reason is that the kind of first-person lyric dominance in poetry. We're often writing poems from the perspective of I did this, I did that. And so I think it's easy for the reader to conflate, especially with a really good poem, to assume, make that sort of logical leap that therefore the speaker is the poet. There's also the workshop culture in which we're meeting poets face to face, and so they're reading their poems aloud. And so again, they create the conditions, or should I say, the workshop creates the conditions in which it might be more believable that what's being read by the actual person who wrote it happens to be true to life. Well, it is true to life, doesn't mean it's factually true. Social media and the way we engage with it often depends upon this notion of authenticity. And there is, of course, a kind of culture of, trauma as credential kind of way of thinking in poetry. The I in art is a construct, it's a made thing. It can never be the real thing because the real thing is the real thing. And so we have to separate the I from the artist who creates it, unless the poem or the poet claim otherwise. Think of the I in a lyric poem as a perspective, as a lens, as a stance. It's something that has been selected and framed, revised and stylized. And here's another very important thing to remember. Just because sometimes there is a real price that we pay emotionally to delve into areas of our own lived experience, and bringing those ideas or that experience or that emotion into a poem does not guarantee that the poem will be any good whatsoever. Every poem, even a deeply personal one, is an act of construction. Examples of when biography is largely irrelevant, poems that depend upon emotional states such as grief, happiness, desire, jealousy, etc. Hypothetical narratives, invented scenarios, dramatic monologues, persona poems, symbolic or surreal work. Emotional truth does not equal factual experience. Imagination is not deception. I'm going to give you one personal experience here. In my collection, PhotoFit, there's a poem in which there's the name of a pub. Now, this pub actually is a real pub on the south coast of England, and it just didn't fit in the poem, and I didn't change it because, well, it was real, until the editor pointed this out to me and said, well, it doesn't need to be real to be true, just change the name of the pub. And I think it was something simple, that actually the actual real name of the pub just didn't fit the scansion, the meter, the kind of rhythmic quality of the line, and it just needed changing up. And once I dealt with that, it totally fixed the poem. We trust a poem because of the language, not because of the poet's lived experience or their resume. However, there are, of course, times when the poet, who the poet is, really does matter. When the writing is centered in areas like immigration, race, indigeneity, disability, or trauma tied to systemic harm. And of course, the issue of turning others' realities into aesthetic material. Let me offer you a simple framework to tackle this area, a framework instead of some rules. Number one, am I writing from witness, research, or investigation? Number two, does the poem claim a lived experience that it does not possess? And number three, who benefits from this voice and who is overwritten, who is erased? So here's one final thought on the notion of trusting the poem, not the poet. Trust the poem, but understand what it is claiming. Trust the poem's craft, but question its authority. And trust the poem, not the poet, unless the poem is asking to be trusted as an authority or claiming a sort of authority that it does not own. So let's now delve into a few prompts to help you tackle this notion of trusting the poem, not the poet. And the first prompt is called the ethical shift. You're going to write two poems, or kind of two versions of the same idea or poem. And the first one is from a direct personal experience that you yourself have lived, you yourself have had. You're going to choose that as your kind of subject area and write about it from a very personal I perspective. And then you're going to write the same poem from a different perspective, not your own, from a place of observation, research, and investigation. And then it's just a matter of taking the two poems side by side and exploring them in terms of their authority, their tone, and then also the responsibility change within those two poems, two different versions of the same subject area. The next prompt is called the unclaimed I. It's a poem that you're going to write from a personal perspective, from the perspective of I, and yet that speaker is never going to reveal who they are, where they are from. You're simply going to allow the emotional truth of the poem to shape the character, shape the speaker on the page. And the third and final prompt in this video is one I'm calling Persona with Limits. You're simply going to write a first-person poem where there is a very clear distance between you, the poet, and the speaker. And you can create this distance in a number of ways. It could be age, the physical age of the speaker. So there could be a 10-year-old child, there could be a 99-year-old adult. It could be time, in terms of the time period. You could set the poem in a different, distant age, whether it's in the future or the past. Or it could be the setting. I mean, you could set your poem on the surface of Mars. It really it requires you to have this kind of leap of imagination and create as much distance as you can between you, the poet, and the speaker without the poem losing resonance, without it losing emotional truth. So as always, thank you so much for watching the video. I really do appreciate it. Please do give it a thumbs up and a subscribe as well if you haven't already done that. It really helps the channel to grow. And it just remains me to say thank you for being here, and I'll be back soon with more poetry content.